Now it's time for another Board Game Brawl Top 10 with Nick Meanahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey peoples, my name is Nick, this is Board Game Brawl, and we are going to talk about my top 10 most anticipated games of Gen Con 2016. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I constructed this list and some other things going on around it, but if you don't want to hear that, if you want to skip straight to the list, I will have a timestamp down at the bottom of your screen and also down in the description section if you're watching this on your mobile device. So please go ahead, you don't have to listen to me ramble. Shoo. Now, for the rest of you that are sticking around, let me tell you a little bit about this. So, of course, this is like the third or fourth time I've done this list, and Gen Con is like the biggest gaming convention in the world at this point. I know it was neck and neck with Essen. I'm pretty sure it overtook it last year, but I don't know. It doesn't really matter, does it? But people do keep track of that kind of stuff. But basically, really what it is, it's an industry fair. It's for people, the primary attraction is for people hawking their wares. All these different publishers, brand new games are often released at Gen Con. Games are demo that will be coming out very soon, so on and so forth. Now, there are other events going on. True Dungeon is a big thing that's there, where people can actually go through a facsimile of a dungeon with teams and badges and all this kind of stuff. And there is some game playing, but that's not really what it's for. There's huge crowds of people going around to see the newest, hottest stuff and go to different events and panels and shows, things like that. I will not be attending this year. I've never attended. Not really of a particular interest to me. I might talk about that more in a future video. But nevertheless, I definitely try to get as many games from there as I possibly can with people that I know who pick up games for me. And also after the fact, I'll just get them in hindsight. Like after they've released, had some time out there, they'll be released out to the general public eventually, even if they were exclusive to Gen Con. But regardless, I like to put together a list of the ones that I'm most excited for. And the source list that I used for this is actually an excellent list compiled by Eric Martin, the head journalist over at BoardGameGeek.com. Every year he puts, for every convention, every year he puts together a list of every game that's either going to be sold or demoed at the show. Every new game sold or purchased. And for my list, I am only focusing on games that are going to be sold at the show. I made the mistake the first year of going for games that will be also demoed, and they never materialized. Okay? In fact, at the end of this video, I'm going to go over games that I put on last year's iteration of this list, and I'll have a special honorable mention from the first year I did this list. So we'll get to that. But in any case, I'm going to go ahead and give you my top 10 most anticipated games for this year. Hopefully you will see my reviews for them sometime in the near future after the show, of course. So without further ado, let's get to it. My number 10 is Star Trek Ascendancy from Gale Force 9. Now, Gale Force 9 has earned a reputation of making very highly produced, high-quality versions of licensed IPs. So, originally it was Spartacus, which was based off of the TV show Spartacus, and then there was the Firefly board game, one of the other more notable ones that they've done. A lot of people love that game. And now we have Star Trek Ascendancy. They got the license for that. And I don't know a ton about this game, but I do know that you're taking control of the different factions of the Star Trek universe. It seems to be based more in the TV series universe. I'm not sure if it's Next Generation or the original series, but there are, well, I'm guessing Next Generation because some of the expansions are like the Cardassians. So that could be very, very interesting. But the board setup and how you're exploring from planet to planet with your faction, trying to gain control of planets. And it actually is reminiscent of StarCraft, the board game, in a sense. So it's very interesting, and I like how it looks very different from everything else that I've seen, especially as far as Star Trek games go. So, based on Gale Force 9's record, I've actually never played or reviewed any of their games before, but they come highly, highly recommended by a large number of people. I am hoping that this, along with Star Trek Frontiers, which came out from WizKids recently, is the signal that we're going to start getting some good Star Trek games, because certainly Star Trek is a franchise that deserves to have some good games made from it. But that is Star Trek Ascendancy from Gale Force 9, my number 10. My number 9 is sort of out of left field one, the Mad Science Foundation from Cryptozoic Entertainment. I had no idea what this game was until I found it on the list, and really was intrigued by it. It's got kind of neat artwork and design, graphic design, but more importantly, the theme really appealed to me. So you're all mad scientists trying to work out different inventions, put together different things. You need different components for your inventions. And that's not a new theme, by the way. But most of the other games that have had this theme so far have not been of interest to me and have just not really seemed to work for the general public either. But this one just seems like it has something. The mechanism also sounds very, very interesting because you are drafting cards, but someone every round is going to decide, is like the head scientist and you're putting, mad scientist, and you're putting different cards into piles, and then players have to draft those piles. So you have to make some decisions like, do I put all the good stuff in this pile and hope that I get to take it? Do I spread out the bad stuff and hope that other players take those? So it seems very, very interesting to me. It's almost like Castles of Mad King Ludwig thing where you're setting the price on things. So I'm very curious to see how that works, and I'm always looking for out-of-left-field games that catch my attention, and Cryptozoic is sort of hitting its stride with some of these more interesting games. So that is the Mad Science Foundation for Cryptozoic, my number 9. My number 8 is another zombie game, but wait, don't go. This one is from Martin Wallace, which might catch some people by surprise, but it really shouldn't, because Martin Wallace, while he is known most for his by the way, the name of the game is Hit Z Road. Get it? Hit Z Road. Although I have it written down as Hit Road Z, which really kind of kills the joke. But in any case, Martin Wallace, while he has been known for heavier Euro-style games and war games and that type of thing, and he still does those, by the way, he has become, like every other game, seems to be a heavily thematic game. He did A Study in Emerald, he did Moon God Invaders, but let's not talk about that too much. But it really seems like he's sort of branching out into these other things, which is very interesting to me. And Hit Z Road, of course, being a zombie game, has a little bit more theme than your typical Euro. And it's also very interesting the way the game seems to be formatted. I don't know every single detail, but you're actually going through a deck of adventure cards. You're in the zombie apocalypse trying to get from like Chicago to California, traveling along Route 66. And the whole graphic design and theme of it, it's almost like a retro look, and it almost reminds me of Fallout in a sense, the Fallout art style, the retro art style that it has. So very, very curious about this one. The pedigree of the designer, plus the fact that it's a zombie game, but they're coming at it from sort of a different angle. I'm very interested in this one, and it kind of took me by surprise as well. That is my number 8, Hit Z Road, from Martin Wallace and his Space Cowboys, excuse me. It's rare that I put a game from USAopoly on any of my lists for anything, but this is the case here. My number 7 is Harry Potter Battle at Hogwarts, a deck-building game from USAopoly, and that's kind of why it's on my list, is the title, because I am a Harry Potter fan. I'm not like an obsessive Harry Potter fan, but I've read all the books, I've watched, I think, most of the movies. I haven't watched all of them, but it's very, very interesting to me, the theme. I still love it quite a bit, the whole storyline and the characters, and it's deck building. So I am immediately interested. Now, my fear was that because USAopoly has sort of made a name for themselves as just taking famous classic board games, mass market games like Risk and Monopoly, and slapping another theme on them, I was like, oh, did they just get some generic deck building theme from another or IP from another company, and they're just slapping a different theme onto it, or are they just taking the core deck building mechanism, which is essentially public domain, and putting another theme onto it? Well, it doesn't seem like that. It actually seems like there's like a board involved, and there's some sort of like different elements of playing cards down as equipment and fighting different villains. So I'm actually wondering if it's something sort of like the DC Comics deck building game where everyone's working together to take out a villain stack. I don't quite know, but it looks like there's more than meets the eye here, and the presentation looks great. So that is the Harry Potter Battle at Hogwarts deck building game from USAopoly. I am genuinely interested, and that's why it's my number 7. Sticking with very interesting themes that I think are underserved in the board gaming community, we have The Last Friday from Ares Games for my number 6. And this is a slasher type of game, a game that is, that's the interesting part. Now, mechanically speaking, it takes a lot of inspiration from Letters from Whitechapel and other games of its ilk, like to a degree Fury of Dracula, where there's hidden movement, there's numbered spaces out on the board, and in this case, the theme is that there is a slasher, like Jason, who is hunting for I don't know if it's campers or just people, innocent people, and the slasher will be moving along, and the hunted have to find him, but they don't really want to find him, and you're going to be shocked when you find him and he's right behind you. So it sort of builds this tension and this fear. But there's mechanism I'm not entirely sure about that really intrigues me, where this alternates, where the hunted becomes the hunter and the hunter becomes the hunted, and it changes from round to round over the course of 4 full rounds of play. So even though I wasn't a big fan of Letters from Whitechapel, I think this one seems to have more thematic meat on the bones, and certainly I think while there are other games that are slasher-oriented, I'm not a huge fan of that genre in movies, but it is intriguing to see a board game delving into that territory, and not many have done it, and not many have done it well. I'm looking at you, Camp Grizzly. So I'm really curious to see what Ares does with this, and if they can actually make a good quality game based on this theme, and I am heartened by what I have seen. That is The Last Friday from Ares Games, my number 6. My number 5 is another game I had not even heard of until I put together this list and saw it on Eric Martin's list. It's from Gray Fox Games, which is or was a subsidiary of Cool Stuff at some point. But it's called London Dread, and it's supposed to be like a storytelling, cooperative game with some real-time elements. One phase is real-time, one phase is not. That takes place, as the name implies, in London, but it's like a period London of like the early, either late 1800s, early 1900s, and you're like, it seems to have shades of Cthulhu, unfortunately, but also just paranormal and mystic stuff where you're like investigators trying to solve different crimes that may have a paranormal and supernatural bent to them. And I love the art style. I love what I've read about how the storytelling goes, where you're working through different adventures and you have to have a planning phase. It's real time, and then you see how the story unfolds after the planning phase is done. It just seems really interesting. I'm sort of doing a Hail Mary here. I don't know too much more about it, but I'm based on the fact that Gray Fox has put out some excellent games in the past, and the fact that the art style is fantastic and the idea of it is good. I am certainly interested. That is London Dread from Gray Fox Games, my number 5. My number 4 is Tyrants of the Underdark from Gale Force 9. It's actually the second game from Gale Force 9 on this list, so they must be having a very good year, which sounds arrogant of me. They're having a good year because 2 of their games are on my list. Whatever. I didn't mean it that way. But no, I am really interested in Tyrants of the Underdark because it is based on the Dark Elves, the Drow, or Drow, the age-old debate, from Dungeons and Dragons, which I loved that race from the game. I mean, not only have I read all the Drizzt books, I've read many other Dark Elf books. I highly recommend a series called The War of the Spider Queen. I think it's 6 books long. Amazing series, so check that out. Okay, I'm rambling now. But Tyrants of the Underdark has you taking control of different factions dedicated to Lolth, the Spider Queen, fighting over stuff in the Underdark of the Dungeons & Dragons world. It looks like it's a heavy strategy game with like warlike elements to it. You're battling for control, battling with different types of units, summoning things. But I just love the theme. I really do, and it looks like it's got a ton of plastic. It's from Gale Force 9, which, as I said before, has been known, even though I haven't played or reviewed their games, they have been known for treating IPs well. So I'm hoping that that is in full force here on Tyrants of the Underdark. I've been purposely avoiding reviews because I don't want to spoil it for myself, but I'm super duper excited for this one. I can't wait to get it in my hands. That is Tyrants of the Underdark from Gale Force 9, my number 4. My number 3 is a game called Clank! Exclamation point. From Renegade Game Studios. And when I talk about a Hail Mary pass on these lists, when I'm like, I am just crossing my fingers and hoping that it's good because I don't have much information, this is the epitome of that. And the fact that it's gotten up to number 3 is pretty impressive. That might just be fortunate in how my list sort of shook out, but I am really excited for it because even though I don't have much to go on other than a component list, a write-up of what the theme is and how the gameplay works, which is more than some of the games have, by the way, I'm still very excited for it because the theme is that you are adventurers going down through a dungeon trying to raid a dragon's horde, which is not a new theme. It could be considered a cliche theme at this point. But what's interesting about it is that it's a deck-building game, which I love, and it has a mechanism where the more noise you make, hence the name of the game, Clank, the worse it's going to be for you because you might wake up the dragon and then you've got all kinds of problems. So I love that idea. There does seem to be more than meets the eye as far as it's not just a deck building game. There's some spatial elements to it. There's like a board involved, lots of different bits and pieces. and I love the artwork on the cover. That's got to be counting for something, right? Okay, I'm not sure why this is so high on the list, but still, I'm standing by the fact that it is one of my most anticipated games because it seems really interesting, and I'm hoping against hope that it lives up to my own hype and the theme and the gameplay that I've heard so far. That is Clank! Exclamation point from Renegade Game Studios, my number 3 anticipated game of Gen Con 2016. So, for my number 2 spot, I knew I was going to choose one of the legendary products coming out this year, and that they would be somewhere on my list, probably very high. There are 3 of them. There's Legendary Civil War, which is a new big box expansion for Marvel Legendary. There is Legendary Encounters Firefly, which uses specifically the encounter system, which it shares with Predator and Alien, but in the Firefly universe. And Legendary Big Trouble in Little China, which actually uses the Marvel Legendary system, and so is directly compatible with that, supposedly. Now, of those 3, I didn't want to just say, I'm saying all 3 of them are my number 2, because the truth is, I'm not anywhere near as excited for Big Trouble in Little China or Firefly as I am for, yes, another Marvel Legendary set. I know there's been tons, and I talk about it all the time, but I'm really excited every time a big box comes out for Marvel Legendary. So that is my number 2, specifically. But I am excited for those other ones to a degree, just because they are more legendary, but the truth is, I know this is going to have people screaming for my geek card to be burned. I don't like Firefly. I like encounters. I like legendary encounters. I don't like Firefly. So the only reason I will get that game is for the mechanisms, which is very weird for me, okay? And as far as Big Trouble in Little China, I love Big Trouble in Little China. I am very hesitant about this game. But if it really does integrate back into Marvel Legendary perfectly, it's a must-buy for me. But Civil War is, I think, where it's going to be at for me, because it's not only is it covering one of the most interesting storylines, I know it's sort of polarizing, but it's one of the most interesting storylines in the Marvel Universe. And by the way, this is based off the comic book version, not the movie version. But it just adds a ton of new heroes. Some of them are I'll say B or C list, but they're interesting at least. So you've got, I think, there's like some dude that turns giant, not Giant Man, but some other character that does that. Misty Knight, another version of Falcon, like the original version of Falcon, new versions of Spider-Man and Captain America, and I think Iron Man. So it looks like it's going to be very, very interesting. There's tons of cards in it. They've even been threatening to do another set of Civil War. That's how much content they potentially had for it. So I'm always happy for Marvel Legendary, and those other ones too. That is my number 2 from Gen Con 2016, Marvel Legendary Civil War. So my number 1 should be a surprise to no one who's followed me at all. It's finally, supposedly, going to be available at the fair, and I actually have a copy pre-ordered. I have no idea whether I'll get it beforehand or after, or whether I'll try and get a copy at Gen Con anyways. It is Seafall from Plaid Hat Games, of course, from the genius Rob Daviau. Another legacy game, but this time it is a legacy game based on nothing else. It is not taking an existing game, Risk or Pandemic, and putting legacy on top of it. It was built from the ground up in a brand new world to be an adventure game where you're different pirate ships of some sort, or not necessarily pirates, but exploring ships, going out in this new uncharted seas, finding islands, fighting the other players, finding civilizations, pillaging civilizations potentially, finding people and crewmates, things like that. Just seems, and you're changing the board. It's legacy, so everything changes permanently. You, your crew, your stats, your ship, you put islands out onto the board, you change them, you have an enmity system where if you fight one of the other players and you beat them, they're going to get bonuses against you in the next game because they remember you and they hate your guts. I just think the whole thing sounds amazing. The production values, because it's Plaid Hat, I expect to be through the roof, so I don't think that will be a problem. And I have not been disappointed by any of Rob Daviau's work, not even just his legacy games, but the other projects that he doesn't really get as much name recognition for, like Heroescape, like Magic Arena of the Planeswalkers, because of that connection. So, super excited for this one. I have been for the last, 2 or 3 years now since it was originally announced, and I hope that it lives up to the hype. I have a feeling it will at least be very good. It might be amazing. I am at least hoping for that. That is Seafall from Plaid Hat Games, my number one most anticipated game of Gen Con 2016. Well, there you have it. I actually did have a pretty hard time constructing the list this year. I thought it would be weak because I hadn't heard of many games I was going to be very interested in. But when I actually sat down and went through Eric's list, and again, I can't thank Eric Martin enough for all the hard work he puts on that list. I will link to it somewhere that you can go to it. But once I started going through it, I found a lot of stuff because there's a lot of new stuff I hadn't even heard of. This seemed very, very interesting to me. But of course, as you can tell, some perennial stuff just made it on there like Seafall and Legendary Marvel. But in any case, I always go through, whenever I do an iterative list, I always go back and look at what I did the last year for the list and see where things shook out. Did I get those games? Did I like those games? Did I hate those games? So on and so forth. Did they never come out? So last year, my number 10 was Wrath of Dragons from, I think, Catalyst Games. Funny story about that. I own the game. It's in shrink wrap behind the camera. I can see it right now. Have never played it. But it looks really good. Dragons. You're all dragons and it's Eurogame elements. Whatever. I'll get to it next year. My number 9 last year was Codenames, which of course turned out very, very well. It's a huge sensation. In fact, tonight, when I'm filming this, they are announcing the Spiel des Jahres winners, and it is a Spiel des Jahres nominee, and it's probably going to win. I anticipate it will win. I will, of course, post on Facebook when I know, but you'll know before current Nick knows, filming this video. But it's a great game. It really is. I don't think it's like the best game ever like some other people do, but it's certainly worthy of that. And this year, Codenames Pictures is coming out at Gen Con. I'll get it, but I'm not as excited because, frankly, you can just do that with Dixit cards, and a lot of people already do it. Number 8 last year was Takenoko Chibis. That one turned out very well, too. Very fun expansion for the original Takenoko. Now, the only problem is it is not compatible with the Collector's Edition, which is the version over here off to the side, off camera, that I have. I actually had to borrow a friend's copy of the original version just to play it enough to review it on the expansion. And I didn't want to buy my own copy of the original, so I still have the expansion. It's literally sitting in my closet until I decide to buy a new version of that, of the base game, or until I'll get rid of it when they come out with a new version for the Collector's Edition, which they've been promising. Who knows? But it's a good expansion. I like it a lot. My number 7 was Tides of Time from Portal Games. Very fun, 2-player only card drafting game. I pull a card, you pull a card, we play them, try to get different symbols in order to score points. Very, very interesting game. A sequel to that I don't think is compatible, called Tides of Madness, is coming out this year. I wasn't interested enough to put it on the list. Other things were better. My number 6 was Legendary Encounters Predator, which came out last year. I did separate the Legendaries last year, sorry. But I was more excited about Predator last year than I was about Firefly or Big Trouble in Little China. And it turned out to be very good. It is very, very similar in some regards to Alien, but there's an awesome competitive mode where you play as the Predators in Legendary Encounters Predator, and I really enjoyed it. Okay, here's a big disappointment. My number 5 last year, I feel embarrassed for putting this on this list, was High Command Rapid Engagement. I'm one of the few staunch supporters of the High Command deck building game, which is based on War Machine and Hordes from Privateer Press. They came out with this 2-player only version, and they had no details on it. I just threw a Hail Mary pass, again, and hoped that it would be a good 2-player iteration of it. All it was taking existing cards from the base set and putting enough for 2 players in one box. That was it. Very disappointing. So I own it, had never even bothered to review it. Speaking of Privateer, my number 4 last year was the Undercity. Also very underwhelming. You can watch my review for that as well. It was a okay Descent-style dungeon crawler, purely cooperative though. The board was very bland. The way that the villains activated was very weird and off-putting and sort of fiddly. Now, having said that, I doubled down and went for the Widower's Wood Kickstarter, hoping that it fixes a lot of the problems. So I still have my copy of Undercity. We'll see how it goes. Number 3 was Blood Rage last year. And of course, Blood Rage was the huge rage no pun intended, of the last year. People love it. I really, really love it. I enjoyed it. I think it made it up to my top 10 or just barely out of my top 10 of my top 100 games in the past year. Just a fantastic game. Some people in my group played it a couple weeks ago and for the first time and loved it. My number 2 was an expansion, the Atlanteans expansion for Imperial Settlers. Awesome pick. Good job, Pass Nick. It's a great expansion. Imperial Settlers is a wonderful game, and the Atlanteans really add a lot to it. I just played as them again a few weeks ago when we played. I still enjoy them. My number 1 last year was another legendary game. This time it was Secret Wars, which in hindsight, I don't know if I would have kept it as number 1, but it was a very good pick. The Secret Wars set, especially the first one, was amazing, and it's a harbinger of things to come, I hope, because there's tons of interesting stuff that was added into that set, so I feel very good about that number 1 pick. And I have an honorable mention. The very first year that I did this list, I put a game called Generation Hex on my list. I knew nothing about it. All I saw was the artwork and the theme that you were wizard kids like at a Hogwarts type school battling it out. And I love the artwork. It was from Eric Lang, who even then I had a lot of respect for and really liked based off games like Chaos in the Old World. And I was like, I don't know anything about it, but I think it's coming out this year. 3 years later, it is supposedly, I keep using that word, coming out at Gen Con 2016. It didn't make it onto my list. Now, why would that be? For 2 reasons. Number 1, if a game has been in mothballs for that long, when it was supposedly done at that time, and that publisher at the time decided not to do it, that's a problem. That means Eric Lang wasn't very happy with it and stuck it in the closet. Then, the publisher that finally picked it up to release it, IDW Games. If you follow my channel at all, I have a very rocky history with their games, meaning most of them are terrible, or mediocre at best. And they decided to publish this one, which leads me to think that maybe they just said, hey, Eric, you're a hot new designer, or hot, not new, but everyone loves you, you're really hot right now, we want to work with you. And Eric's like, oh, yeah, sure, goes into the closet, yeah, take this one, it's done. That's what I'm afraid happens here. I hope I'm wrong, I hope it's amazing. I thought it was worth revisiting now just to tell you that some things just eventually happen, so... And regardless, that is the entirety of my Gen Con 2016 special. I won't be at the fair, but I hope that if you are going, you stay safe and have an amazing time. Have the time of your life. People seem to love it there, and for good reason. Game as much as you can, get as many cool games as you can, and just stay safe and have fun. Take care.